John, Sarah, Emily, and Ethan Johnson appeared to be the perfect family in the quiet town of Maple Creek, until one fateful night shattered everything. Sarah and Ethan were found brutally murdered, and the only witnesses were Emily, the missing daughter, and John, the distraught husband with a questionable alibi. What unfolded next would reveal dark secrets, twisted motives, and a chilling truth that no one saw coming. The Johnson family was the epitome of suburban success, their picturesque life a model for the quiet town of Maple Creek. John Johnson, a methodical accountant, spent his days crunching numbers, while Sarah, a devoted homemaker, poured her energy into creating a warm and welcoming home. Their children, Emily and Ethan, were bright, well-mannered, and cherished by neighbors and teachers alike. Their modest two-story home on Oak Ridge Lane was a hub of family activity, its neatly trimmed hedges and flower beds a testament to Sarah's care. To all who knew them, the Johnsons seemed untouchable by the chaos that plagued the outside world. On an early October morning, Maple Creek woke to an unsettling chill in the air. The town, known for its calm predictability, was shaken when Mrs. Callahan, the Johnsons' elderly neighbor, noticed something peculiar. Sarah Johnson, ever diligent about locking up at night, would never have left the front door ajar. Mrs. Callahan, uneasy but hesitant to intrude, decided to call the police. When officers arrived, the scene inside the Johnson home was horrifying. The once cozy living room, adorned with family photographs and Ethan's scattered toys, was now a tableau of violence. Sarah Johnson's lifeless body lay sprawled across the carpet, her hands outstretched as though she'd tried to shield herself. Ethan was found nearby, his small frame huddled under the coffee table, as if seeking refuge from the unspeakable. Blood stained the plush white sofa and walls, evidence of a brutal struggle. Drawers had been pulled open and furniture overturned, suggesting a frenzied search for something. The investigation began immediately. The absence of forced entry raised questions. Had the killer been someone the family knew? Had the Johnsons unwittingly let their murderer into their sanctuary? Officers canvassed the neighborhood, but no one reported anything unusual. No shouts, no commotion. The stillness of the night had hidden the horrors unfolding in the Johnson home. Adding to the mystery was the absence of John and Emily Johnson. John was known to travel occasionally for work, but his whereabouts remained unclear. Emily, a bright and responsible high school junior, had no history of rebellious behavior or running away. Friends and neighbors were baffled by their disappearance. Was it possible they had fled for safety, or could they have been victims themselves? Speculation ran wild. Maple Creek, a town unaccustomed to crime, became a hotbed of rumors. Whispers of secret lives, hidden tensions, and possible motives circulated among residents. Reporters from surrounding cities descended on Oak Ridge Lane, their cameras capturing the image of the Johnson home, its front porch bathed in the eerie blue and red glow of police lights. The Johnson murders became the talk of every household, the gruesome details sparking both fear and fascination. For the townspeople, this was more than a tragedy. It was an invasion of the peace they had taken for granted. Little did they know, the truth behind the Johnson family's unraveling would be darker and more complex than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation unfolded, police turned their attention to John Johnson, the missing husband and father. Hours after the bodies of Sarah and Ethan were discovered, John was located at a modest hotel 50 miles away, seemingly unaware of the tragedy that had struck his family. He appeared calm, almost too composed, as he explained to officers that he had been attending a work conference and had stayed overnight to avoid the late drive home. His alibi seemed plausible at first glance, with hotel staff confirming his check-in and a receipt corroborating his story. However, something about John's demeanor unsettled the detectives. He expressed shock at the news of his wife and son's deaths, but was oddly vague when asked about his activities the previous evening. His responses lacked the raw emotion one might expect from a man who had just lost half his family. Suspicion began to creep in, though there was still no concrete evidence tying him to the scene. As investigators dug deeper into John's movements, inconsistencies began to emerge. Surveillance footage from a gas station near the hotel revealed John purchasing an assortment of cleaning supplies late at night, just 2 days before the murders. The items included bleach, gloves, and trash bags. an unusual shopping list for an accountant on a work trip. When confronted, John dismissed the purchases as unrelated, claiming they were for a minor plumbing issue at home. Yet, no such problem had been reported, and the explanation rang hollow. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the Johnson home for clues. No fingerprints or DNA outside the family's own were found, further supporting the theory that the killer had been someone close to them. John's absence at the time of discovery was suspicious, but without more evidence, police couldn't rule out the possibility that he had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Attention soon shifted to Emily, the missing teenage daughter. Friends and teachers described her as a diligent student and devoted sister, but a few noted recent changes in her behavior. She had seemed withdrawn in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, her usual cheerfulness replaced by a quiet unease. A close friend confided that Emily had expressed frustration with her father, mentioning arguments that had grown increasingly heated. While none of this proved Emily's involvement, it cast a shadow over the harmonious image the family had projected. As the media descended on Maple Creek, the story took on a life of its own. Some speculated that John had fled in guilt, while others believed he was an innocent man caught in a web of circumstantial evidence. Emily's disappearance added another layer of complexity, with theories ranging from her being an accomplice to her being another victim. With no clear answers, the pressure on law enforcement mounted. The Johnson case was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a nationwide mystery, the family's secrets threatening to unravel under the intense scrutiny. For the investigators, every new lead seemed to deepen the enigma rather than solve it. The investigation into the Johnson family tragedy gained momentum as forensic teams uncovered details that painted a complex picture of the crime. Among the evidence collected from the scene was the murder weapon, a kitchen knife found discarded in the living room, its handle wiped clean of obvious prints. However, under closer examination, latent fingerprints were lifted from the blade. The results stunned everyone involved. The prints belonged to Emily Johnson. Emily's apparent connection to the weapon shifted the narrative entirely. Detectives now faced two troubling possibilities. Either Emily had been involved in the murders, or she had used the knife in self-defense. But if it was self-defense, why had she fled the scene? Her disappearance became even more pressing as authorities scrambled to piece together what had truly happened that night. As they dug into the Johnson family's past, investigators uncovered fractures beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect lives. Sarah Johnson, known for her cheerful demeanor and active involvement in community events, had confided in friends about struggles within her marriage. According to one close confidant, Sarah had grown increasingly wary of John's temper, describing him as controlling and prone to fits of anger. While there was no documented history of domestic violence, these revelations cast doubt on John's image as a mild-mannered professional. Emily's journal, found in her bedroom during a search of the house, provided further insight. Pages filled with scrawled entries revealed a young girl grappling with fear and frustration. She wrote about her father's strict rules, her feelings of being stifled, and an incident where he allegedly threatened to take away her phone and social freedoms if she didn't conform to his expectations. The journal entries hinted at a household under pressure, but they stopped short of implicating Emily in any criminal intent. Adding to the mystery, financial records unearthed by detectives revealed that John had been under significant stress. The Johnsons' pristine suburban life had been propped up by loans and mounting debt. Only weeks before the murders, Sarah had taken out a substantial life insurance policy, naming John as the primary beneficiary. This discovery brought motive into sharp focus. Could financial desperation have driven John to orchestrate the unthinkable? Complicating matters further was the evidence of staging at the crime scene. The overturned furniture and open drawers seemed deliberate, as though someone had tried to create the illusion of a break-in. Yet nothing valuable had been stolen. This detail suggested that the crime had been carefully planned rather than a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. Despite these findings, questions lingered. Why would Emily's fingerprints be on the knife if she wasn't directly involved? Could she have been forced into a situation beyond her control? Or was she hiding a secret that would upend everything investigators thought they knew? As the pieces of the puzzle began to align, one thing was clear. The Johnson case was far more intricate than anyone had anticipated. The search for Emily intensified, with law enforcement fearing that the key to solving the mystery might lie with the missing teenager. Each new revelation only deepened the enigma, leaving everyone to wonder what truths would ultimately come to light. The breakthrough came when investigators tracked Emily Johnson's cell phone signal to an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, nearly 30 miles from Maple Creek. Officers approached cautiously, fearing what they might find inside. The cabin was a dilapidated structure, its windows boarded up and roof partially caved in. The air was thick with tension as they entered, calling out for Emily. Moments later, they found her huddled in a corner, shivering and visibly shaken, but alive. Emily's appearance was disheveled. Her clothes were torn, and dirt streaked her face. She seemed terrified, not just of her surroundings, but of the officers themselves. After ensuring she was physically unharmed, they escorted her to safety, where she was questioned about her disappearance and the events leading up to the murders. Through sobs and fragmented recollections, Emily recounted a harrowing story. She admitted to being in the house on the night of the murders, but denied having killed her mother or brother. According to Emily, it was her father, John, who had orchestrated the entire ordeal. She claimed he had become increasingly unhinged in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, often speaking in cryptic terms about starting over and solving their financial problems. Emily said she had overheard arguments between her parents about money, with John pressuring Sarah to agree to drastic measures. On the night of the murders, Emily alleged that she had witnessed John attacking Sarah in a fit of rage. Panicked, she had grabbed the nearest object, a knife from the kitchen counter, and tried to intervene. Her fingerprints on the weapon corroborated this part of her account. However, she claimed John had overpowered her and forced her to leave the house, threatening that she would be implicated if she didn't comply. Fearing for her life and distraught over what she had witnessed, Emily fled to the cabin, a place she had discovered during a family hike years earlier. Her testimony turned the case on its head. Detectives revisited John's alibi, scrutinizing every detail. Surveillance footage from the hotel parking lot revealed that John had left the premises during the night of the murders, returning just before dawn. This directly contradicted his claim of being there the entire time. Furthermore, a forensic examination of the cleaning supplies John had purchased showed traces of blood matching Sarah and Ethan, hidden in microscopic crevices of the gloves. Emily's story gained further credibility when a search of John's personal computer unearthed disturbing evidence. He had conducted extensive research on topics like staging a crime scene, life insurance payouts after murder, and ways to frame someone for a crime. This chilling digital trail painted a picture of premeditation, aligning with Emily's account of her father's actions and intentions. With this new evidence in hand, authorities arrested John Johnson. The once respected accountant maintained his innocence, insisting that Emily was lying to cover her own involvement. However, the weight of the evidence against him was undeniable. For investigators, Emily's escape and subsequent revelations were the turning point in a case that had confounded them from the start. The trial of John Johnson captured national attention, transforming the quiet tragedy of Maple Creek into a media sensation. Cameras surrounded the courthouse as reporters detailed every twist in the case. Inside the courtroom, emotions ran high. On one side, the prosecution presented their case with chilling precision, methodically dismantling John's defense. On the other, John maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed by his own daughter Emily, who he portrayed as troubled and manipulative. The prosecution opened with a powerful narrative. A man consumed by financial despair, driven to murder his wife and son in a calculated attempt to claim a lucrative life insurance payout. They outlined the evidence against John, his suspicious purchases of cleaning supplies, his fabricated alibi, and the incriminating internet searches that suggested premeditation. Emily's testimony was central to their case. She described her father's volatile behavior, the argument she overheard between her parents, and her desperate attempt to intervene on the night of the murders. Forensic evidence bolstered Emily's account. Blood traces found on the gloves John had purchased matched Sarah and Ethan, indicating his involvement in the crime. Furthermore, experts testified that the crime scene had been staged, pointing to John's attempt to mislead investigators. The prosecution argued that his meticulous planning unraveled under scrutiny, leaving behind a trail of damning evidence. The defense countered by casting doubt on Emily's credibility. They painted her as a rebellious teenager who had grown resentful of her father's strict rules. They suggested that her fingerprints on the knife were not evidence of self-defense, but proof of her culpability. The defense also tried to explain away John's suspicious behavior, arguing that his internet searches and purchases had been misinterpreted and taken out of context. However, their arguments struggled to hold weight against the mountain of evidence. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Emily took the stand. Her composure wavered as she recounted the horrors of that night, her voice breaking as she described the loss of her mother and brother. Her testimony was emotional and compelling, painting a vivid picture of a teenager trapped in an unimaginable nightmare. The courtroom was silent as she described her father's threats and her flight to the cabin, a desperate attempt to escape his reach. In the end, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. John Johnson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge delivered the sentence, John sat stoically, his face betraying no emotion. Emily, seated with her extended family, wept quietly, the weight of the verdict both a relief and a reminder of the ordeal she had endured. In the aftermath, Maple Creek struggled to move forward. The Johnson house, once a symbol of suburban harmony, stood empty, a haunting reminder of the tragedy. For Emily, the road to healing was long and uncertain. She moved in with relatives, determined to rebuild her life while carrying the scars of that night. The case remained etched in the minds of everyone who followed it, a chilling example of how greed and desperation could destroy even the most seemingly perfect families.